We originally were going to have how many? 4 or 5 people on this panel, but the hurricane has truly taken its toll, even here in LA. But I know between Brent and Stephanie here that we're going to have plenty to talk about on this important subject of currency. Well, I don't know if I'd say currency versus measurement. It's truly, currency in measurement. It's not an adversarial relationship. But what I'm going to do first is turn it over to my panelists to just individually introduce themselves and what they do for their respective companies, and then we'll dive right in. So, Stephanie?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stephanie Freed. I'm VP of Research, Insights, and Analytics at Vevo. For those of you who are not familiar with Vevo, we are a music video platform. So if you go to YouTube, you go to vevo.com, you go to AOL, BET, Univision, many different sites, and you go watch your favorite Justin Bieber video, for example, you will be watching that through Vevo. And so what I do is I measure that experience. So I'm measuring what our users are doing, what they like about the platform, what they'd like to see change with the platform. So we're looking into improvements that we can make. We're also looking at the advertising effectiveness and the advertising experience and showing brands who partner with us why they should be partnering with us. And then I also oversee the analytics side, which is looking at the behavioral components of what people are doing. So what should our homepage look like? What kinds of click-throughs are more or less effective? What's the value of a registered user? So those are the types of things I do every day.
Great. Brent?
Hi, Brent Horowitz, VP of Business Development at Freewheel. Freewheel is a company that offers a suite of technology services wrapped in advisory and consulting to the world's largest media companies. That includes content rights owners like most of the major TV programmers, as well as an increasing share of aggregators and distributors of that content, from online portals to pay TV operators, MVPDs, and the like. And what we do with that technology and advisory is help these folks essentially evolve their businesses into this new multi-screen world, and in so doing allow them to make as much money as possible from their content. So what I specifically do there is help them manage their relationships with everybody across the ecosystem, from those in their technology stack as well as those across their distribution landscape and demand sources like ad networks and the like.
Great. Obviously, online video measurement is a piece of that broad multi-screen puzzle that you're working on at Freewheel.
Yep.
But let's just sort of set the stage here in terms of measurement in online video. In terms of getting a currency together, right now, as the market stands, I mean, we're basically talking at this point about Nielsen and Comscore. Could we sort of, handicap this race for a bit and talk a bit about what each of these, whether it's Nielsen online campaign ratings or what Comscore does, what they bring to the market vis-a-vis each other? Do either of you want to kick that off with an assessment?
Sure, I can. I think, right now they're kind of neck and neck, although I just heard Nielsen say that they've become the standard, which really isn't true. But I think they're similar but also pretty different in terms of how they're measuring things and what they're measuring. So Nielsen obviously comes from the TV world, and they have now a cross-platform offering where they're able to give you the cross-platform TV plus online only, so no mobile in their reach of a campaign. They can provide gender and age. So that's really what they're focused on right now, and they're getting their online data from Facebook. So they have a lot of scale there, obviously, and you can actually run a campaign for as little as a couple of days and already start to learn the demographics of that campaign. Comscore, on the other hand, now has a multi-platform offering that includes mobile. They provide a lot more information, at least on the online side, about the audience that you're reaching. So they provide income information, they provide ethnicity information, so Hispanic audience. And they also provide viewability, although Nielsen's getting into that as well. Comscore really has that now as part of their standard product. So those are some of the differences. I think Nielsen is really working with their TV clients and trying to kind of upsell them on the online piece of it, because a lot of advertisers have been asking for a long time, what is my incremental reach? What is the value of that additional audience to me? Am I just building my frequency, or am I building my reach and I'm reaching new people? And so Nielsen's trying to answer that question for them, and they're obviously used to those TV ratings and the GRP information that they're getting there from Nielsen. So it's kind of a natural fit. Whereas Comscore is more of an endemic online measurement company that's kind of moving the opposite way, and they're doing a better job right now in terms of mobile and mobile measurement. So I think that's kind of where the companies stand.
And we'll get back to mobile in a bit, but Brent, as you advise clients, my guess is it's going to be different strokes for different folks. Certain clients are probably better off with one or the other. How do you play that?
Yeah, and it depends on what part of our company. If it's our advisory services business, they're going to be more comfortable weighing in with specific recommendations based on exactly to your point, what a given client is looking to do. In my day job, which is to work with everybody out there and make sure that our ad management platform can essentially enable either one of those currencies and route through the entire planning and buying and forecasting process, the data associated with their currencies. We'll work with either one, and I wouldn't want to make a recommendation. My opinion on that would change if I saw one pulling ahead of another, just in the objective criteria and things in terms of what we'd be looking for. So, a few of those criteria would be, can you follow our client's video wherever it goes? So not just mobile, but iPads and tablets in particular were a big driver for why you saw the TV rating side of Nielsen, what's often termed C3. Or C3 extended screen ratings, which means extending television ratings into digital devices. You saw that fall off as a way for a lot of this content to be monetized, because Nielsen had trouble making that measurement work on tablets, right? So, and then increasingly you get into game consoles and connected TVs, and obviously a lot of these environments are close to the heart of a lot of folks in this room and at this conference. So certainly one criterion would be, can you follow the content and the consumer wherever they are? And if we saw one pulling ahead of another, and one of them is a little bit right now, then we would probably start steering clients in that direction. A second would be, can you be effective not just in measuring, which is sort of the end of the process, but can you sort of grow through back to the beginning of the media planning and buying and selling process to, for example, help big sellers of ad inventory try and understand how to build a plan for the first place, or in the first place with their advertisers, right? So if an advertiser comes to the table and says, I want to reach 18 to 34-year-old males, and you don't know what of your content is watched by those folks, or you have some idea, but that doesn't necessarily map to what Nielsen or Comscore would say 18 to 34-year-old males are watching, you're effectively kind of grappling in the dark and having to sort of steer looking backwards, if that makes sense. And so that's certainly something that we're working with both of them on, because we see deficiencies with both right now in allowing those that have constrained inventory, which means there's an opportunity cost with having to adjust things on the fly if you don't get paid for all of it. We're working with both Comscore and Nielsen to help make the entire process of planning, forecasting, executing in real time, and then measuring to make that whole process work better.
Well, let's take a step back for a second. Sorry, is this on? Or not? Hold on. And we're back. What I was curious about was, when I think about what the measurement picture looks like in the TV world, Nielsen gets more than its fair share of criticism. A certain M word gets used. And so is it possible that we're better off in the online world with two, possibly more measurements, or is there any downside to that?
I don't think there's any downside to it. I think it's good, because I think they have to keep competing to be better than the other one. They have to keep competing to measure impressions across multiple platforms. They have to keep competing to innovate, to measure viewability, to measure effectiveness, and to measure all the things around what those impressions mean. And I think that's a really good thing. I mean, you see them, you see one announcement come out, and 2 weeks later, the other's making an announcement that it's even better. And I think that's really good, for us as the buyers of those measurement services to have that competition there.
But, sorry.
No, agreed.
Okay, but is there, I mean, I also, when I hear about online data, the verb I often hear next is drown. I mean, is there a too much data risk here, especially as potentially others come into this marketplace?
I don't think so, and I think what's actually kind of nice about it is, and you talked about like the planning phases, and it is really difficult because on TV you're using the Nielsen ratings to figure out what the demographics are of a show, and then you're selling that show, and then Nielsen is measuring how you deliver on that show. So it's the same measurement service where you're kind of doing everything, whereas here we've got a multitude of targeting solutions, and then we also have different companies measuring, and some of even the survey vendors are moving into trying to understand the demographics of audiences, and it's hard to know what is right, who is right in terms of composition, and so it's almost kind of nice to have the different sources because it helps us calibrate a little bit and understand that every measurement source is a little bit different, and so there's no golden rule. It kind of highlights the fact that this isn't a perfect science right now, and that none of the services are probably perfect, and they're all kind of circling around one number.
Well, and I think definitions are important too. And when you look at, when we're talking ComScore versus Nielsen, and for those who are thinking, well, why just those two? There's so many other folks that have good data against users. Lots of companies have very, very rich data sets on their own subscribers. We call that first-party data versus third-party data. So you guys have a great understanding of what your users are doing. Most of the major cable companies have been waiting for 15, 20 years to unlock and unleash their user data from an advertising targeting standpoint and see that as a key asset. So yeah, agreed, there's no shortage of data, but the difference between data, we call that insight data, which is just sort of what happened, how many people consumed my video, who were those people, where are my users going throughout my service so I understand how to make that better, and websites, they call that pathing. Which ads were consumed in which environments. All of that stuff is insight data that can help you build better services, help you respond to the needs of your users better, help understand what video to put in what areas of whatever your service or environment is from sort of a merchandising standpoint, not unlike a retailer might. None of those things are currencies. What a currency is some unit of something against which money is traded. And so from an advertising standpoint, the currency of television, people say, is Nielsen. Well, Nielsen is actually essentially, I'll say it, monopolistic provider of a GRP or a TRP, a gross rating point or a television rating point, right? So it's how many people, a gross rating point is how many people viewed this show. So if it's a GRP of 1 or 2, that means 1 or 2 million people viewed it or tuned in to view it at some point. Then there's a TRP, which is a targeted rating point. So how many people within a given demographic. And when a television salesperson sells to an advertiser, a brand advertiser in television, they're going to sell a combination of the content, some ad product which might be a category exclusive. So Ford's the only advertiser in this particular show, Chrysler can't air, and I'll pay more money for that. And a TRP or a GRP, some demographic. And that is effectively the currency that is signed on the contract and that has to be delivered. And if it's not, then that seller has to make good on that or make up for it in some other form or fashion. So when we're talking about online currencies, we're talking about who is in a position, what companies are in a position to step in and help build some kind of equivalency for a brand advertiser to allow them to effectively translate what they're doing on TV to a digital video environment. And the reason that's important is because there are other sets of data which over time might evolve into a currency. But I think what we're all trying to do right now is look at who's most apt to provide that today and who already provides that. So Nielsen provides it, is the closest to a currency digitally. Online, that currency is typically the impression, at least for brand advertising. So it's just any ad server like ourselves that says an impression was served, we go through an auditing process. We're MRC accredited, the Media Rating Council, and there's all these. It's a very, very long and sordid topic, but basically, if we say it's an impression, all the parties involved, the sellers and the buyers, can nod their heads and say, yes, an impression was served. So that's the currency of digital. ComScore, we all believe, because they sort of measure all things digital, is probably the best served to be that currency short term. So I think what we're talking about is for the next few years, to your original question, who's best suited to be that currency, it's an open question as to what that becomes down the road.
And also, when you're talking about GRPs, conceivably Google is a company that could play in this game. They're kind of swimming in data. I mean, is there the prospect of them coming in some significant way?
Yes, I think so. However, I also think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there because they are a publisher, and they obviously have some skin in the game too. They sell advertising. And as an agency, if I was on the agency side or the brand side, and I had a buy with Google or I had a buy with the YouTube channel, and they told me, okay, we'll tell you what our delivery is against this target, and you'll pay us based on what we tell you, I'd say, forget it. Like, we need some kind of third-party verification, and that's why ComScore and Nielsen are not the ones that are selling the ads. They're just doing the verification and the measurement, and you really need that independent third body to do that versus trusting the publisher. That's why we have third-party tags and tracking tags on everything. They don't trust us to tell them how many impressions we've delivered. They measure it themselves. And I think, they need to have that. We need to have that.
Okay. We touched just a bit earlier on mobile tablets. I mean, is the consumption levels at this point of video on wireless devices such that to really only have, the sort of web desktop browser-based measurement picture just kind of woefully incomplete? And how far along do you think before wireless tablet measurement from either of these companies starts to really get traction?
I mean, well, they've got to do it. I mean, we would.
But can they?
We would certainly think it's table stakes. I mean, you can't propose to be the company that is the currency. Certainly not if you're going to claim to be, the standard, unless you can measure the expanse of screens that exist today. For a variety of reasons. One is they're going much faster. Two is a lot of the brand advertisers that want to be associated with particular shows, and those shows are brands unto themselves, want to follow that brand onto wherever the screen is it's being consumed. And a lot of those brands are interested in reaching younger demographics, consumers, the ones that they can't reach on TV. I mean, one of the sort of, I thought it was potentially earth-shattering, it turned out not to be, but stat that was in many of the trades, I think including Variety, was when a study came out that said that the median viewer of primetime broadcast, and so that's excluding cable networks, but just the four major broadcasters, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, was 51 years old. And if 18 to 49 is the key demographic that brand advertisers are trying to reach, what does that say when the median age of a broadcast on the television is 51? One of the natural reactions, and probably good reactions, that these advertisers had is, well, geez, I better get to them, the younger demographics, where they are consuming content, and that is on these other screens. And so I think for all of those reasons, it's not something that's sort of, we can figure it out later. I mean, it's got to happen now.
Yeah, and I think certainly for some content owners and publishers, it's going to be more important than for others. There are, you hear like Pandora and 70% of their time spent on mobile, I believe. Whereas you have maybe an older skewing network, you might not see that as much on mobile. But I do obviously think it's important. I think what needs to happen as well is improvement of the targeting solutions on mobile too, because if we're going to be measuring demographics and trying to get guaranteed demographics on mobile. We need to be able to do that as well as measure it. And I think that, we'll kind of see what happens with ComScore, but supposedly that is starting to happen now. And I think even without the GRPs and understanding who the audience is, I think even just understanding right now what your overlap is between platforms is huge. I mean, we've been asking about that in single source measurement from Nielsen for forever, and it's always been, they've been trying, but it's never really made sense. Like, the numbers were never very logical. And I think now this GRP race has driven some innovation in that area to be able to get these single source panels where we can finally get more information on, when you have a campaign that's running on TV, online, and on mobile, what is your reach across those platforms? And figure out what your strategy is going to be based on your goals and objectives for reaching people, and what creative message you want to carry across those platforms. And I think that's a huge part of this that we'll all be able to take advantage of.
Where does ComScore sit in this single source race?
They're in it. So they have they have, and they're not saying who the provider is, but they have 5 million TV households that they're getting set-top box data from, and supposedly it's a representative TV audience. And then they're able to take the IP address from those set-top boxes and connect it with their online panel. And then they also have a mobile metered panel. And then they have a single source kind of calibration survey that they have. I think it's like 30,000 people, which is pretty robust, where they can see the overlap for those people. So those people are metered across the devices, and then they can calibrate that overall bigger overlap audience and give a reach number across the platforms. So they're beta testing that right now, but they do have, it seems like, kind of the tools in place to start doing those types of analyses that we've been getting asked about for 5 years now.
Okay. Well, it's one thing to get eyeballs, it's another thing to gauge effectiveness. How does using GRPs play with regard to this? And, will we see an evolution here?
I mean, for me, that's one big issue that I have with GRPs, is that it kind of dumbs down the measurement, and that you're basically just counting eyeballs. And it's not counting the value of those eyeballs. So if I'm an advertiser, would I rather reach 100 people on TV where the lift is 2% in purchase intent? Or would I rather reach 50 people online where the lift is 10%? I'd rather reach those people online, right? But the GRPs aren't measuring that. And so if I just look at GRPs, I'm going to go with TV if I paid the same amount of money for those eyeballs. And that's, I think, one of the problems with this measurement, is that the effectiveness isn't part of it right now. And it really, I think, hurts the online experience, where we know people are more engaged. We've done a lot of cross-media studies to show the value of online video over TV, and that's not part of the equation right now. And I think we need to have more of an effective GRP, which takes that into account. It's also going to be different, obviously, site by site. It's going to be different for a video ad network versus a premium publisher. And we need to think about that when making those decisions, and it doesn't come out in just a spreadsheet of GRPs. So, I think it's very important. ComScore and Nielsen are both working on it, but I think they're working on it more slowly, because they're really looking at multi-platform, which is really important. But I think this effectiveness is just a completely necessary layer to this measurement, and without it, I think it's pretty ineffective as a real valuable buying tool.
But at the same time, that's how TV is bought today, and that's, I think, where a lot of the action is going to be in terms of what is deemed convergence over the next 3, 4, 5 television seasons. And the reason I keep talking TV is not just because our clients are there, but very purposely because that's where the bulk of the advertising dollars are. And so for years and years and years, through the growth of the internet and web media, you always heard this stat about, there are two refrains that I've heard in my career, and I've been involved with internet media since '97. One is the gap in the ratio between eyeballs and money, right? So this notion that there's X amount of eyeballs online, but only, 0.3, 0.5X amount of money relative to what you see on television. And, it's simple logic, which is, if you build it, they will come, and when they come, the ad dollars will follow. The problem, one of the key problems has been the fact that the way that those ad dollars are bought on TV are different than the way that they're proposed to buy online. And the sort of turf battle over who becomes the next currency and who has the best data. The other is that because it's measurable, because it's interactive, because it's more engaging, it's therefore better. And I think everyone also knows that's true. Again, the problem is no one knows what to do with that. So the big brand buyers who are going into the upfronts and plunking down $3 billion without even knowing what shows it's going to be spent against yet, they have to spend that money. And there isn't enough of a consistent way to spend that money to reach people that they know are actually corresponding to the way that they bought in the past, that their brand's going to be happy with, to make that happen online. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes every year. And so I think when you think about, particularly at a streaming media conference, what does convergence mean? To us, convergence is convergence of business models. And so what these GRPs represent, or the online GRPs, is really what we're talking about with Comscore Nielsen today. What they represent is a bit of a bridge that allows some of this digital inventory to start to build equivalencies with the way that TV works, and allows that TV money to start to flow online. And I think what that does is kind of prime the pump, if you will, so that this thing kind of spirals up over the next few seasons. And then once you've got a baseline amount of money that's flowing that's meaningful, then you can start to layer in as an online publisher or as a second screen provider, or a data asset provider. You can layer in those pieces of value to say, look, on TV, this same show would net you, you can charge $30 for, but if I can give you these data assets or this engagement proof, then that'll get it to 35 or 40. So it's almost like you have your baseline GRP plus some additional things on top that make it more valuable.
Right. I mean, I think that also, one thing, and I mentioned this a little bit before, and part of the problem, I guess, with premium online video, and I came from NBC Universal, and we used to get asked, if I have a campaign on TV with NBC and I have a campaign online with NBC.com, how many extra people am I getting? I want to know I'm getting new people. And, truthfully, the answer was they're usually NBC TV viewers, right? They're going to NBC.com because they watch NBC shows, and they really wanted us to be able to deliver you are getting this many more people by buying online. And that was really an incentive to get them to buy online, was to get those new people. And I think these measurement systems will help us do that and prove that value. And Nielsen's been kind of looking at that for a little bit. We actually did like an incremental reach study at Vivo, where you can look at, if I have this campaign on TV, where should I go online to build my reach when that's my goal? What are the best sites to be on that have the least overlap with my TV campaign? And I think that is really valuable. But when you're looking at, kind of the cost per point, right, and making that trade-off, and we get those requests, what's my cost per point when against this audience? And then they're just comparing that cost per point to the TV cost per point. And a lot of the time not giving value for display, for example, or companion units that do have value. That is, I think, kind of a negative for online, because there's no syndicated service that shows the incremental value. There's no IAG that's a syndicated IAG for online, the way there is for TV, so that I can show that my Bravo show is better than a TBS show. I just made that up. I don't know if that's true. But there's nothing like that for us online to show the value of that content that you were talking about earlier in that decision-making process. And so that kind of puts us at a disadvantage. Even with the same currency, we need to be able to show that value. versus the TV, counterparts for a specific campaign.
Having said all that, I feel like we kind of keep like rewinding half step and then coming back to your question. The fact that, for example, Nielsen bought a company called Vizu, which is an ad effectiveness or a brand effectiveness company one of the main ways they'd work is you'd see an ad and then they would, the next creative would actually be a survey to ask you questions that are standard on TV, things like brand effectiveness and awareness and purchase intent and all those sort of top of the funnel metrics to see how they were affected. The fact that Nielsen bought them, I think, is telling. On an earlier panel, I saw people use the example of Discovery buying Revision 3 as sort of a sign that, the TV content's coming together with the made-for-web content. I think this is another example where you see made-for-web sort of brand study technology being bought by Nielsen as a way to extend what they do on TV into digital channels. So I think there is thinking even at Nielsen, if I can say that, that yes, we need to do more than just provide a GRP, right? That
right.
Creative effectiveness is actually kind of important, and
right.
and they bought a company. I think that proves that they think that as well.
And also to go back to sort of a previous question, I mean, doesn't the whole question of effectiveness get it brought into even sharper relief on the mobile platforms? I mean, isn't that really where, at least in the early going, it seems like the effectiveness, the perception is effectiveness is just, it's more effective on these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, the studies, Insight Express and Dynamic Logic, the big vendors in ad effectiveness have done studies. They have norms now for mobile, and it's shown that mobile is more effective. And, obviously, just as much as the online environment needs to have that effectiveness to compare to TV, I think mobile needs that as well so that we can prove the value of that platform too. So definitely I think that needs to be part of it. I think that's probably going to come after, online, because it's certainly right now with cookies on mobile and measuring exposure, it's a lot more difficult to do a mobile study. With tracking exposures and the control as well, making sure you have a clean control. So I think we still have a ways to go in terms of figuring that out on its own. And then obviously, would want that to be part of this measurement as well.
And I think mobile, more than any other second screen or alternate screen, and I'm including, by the way, connected devices in the primary screen in the living room, whether it's through a Roku or an Xbox, is, as it relates to this question of effectiveness, the screen is so small that the form factor changes and that the brands are actually wondering if the sort of lift is there, or should we even be doing the same creative? And so you don't see those types of questions with the tablet, even though it's the same operating system as mobile. So from a delivery standpoint, in a lot of cases, it's not exactly the same, but more or less the same. I don't know that, I'm speaking a little out of turn here, but I don't know that the brands quite feel that way just because the screen is so small. So should a 30-second ad even be the way that we do this? And if we do it, are we really repurposing something for a TV that was designed for a 40-inch screen, or should it be endemic to the platform? I think mobile, from our perspective, is the one screen or distribution platform that should probably be thought of separately, whereas we think the other ones are, essentially the same as television.
Okay. One more question for me before I'm going to ask you guys. If you have questions, just raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you, or just stand up and do your thing. But going back online, when I look at an ad in stream online, more often than not, or maybe not more often than not, commonly enough, that's just one piece of a broader ad push on screen, whether it's skinned or banners or whatnot. Is a GRP system, is Nielsen or ComScore fully taking into account are they measuring everything in that kind of system?
Yes, they are measuring. Oh, it just got really dark.
If an assassin comes in, just let us know.
Lit up, and that's about it. They are measuring everything, and it brings up something about viewability as well, because right now the IAB has a viewability standard for display and not quite yet for video. So they are measuring the display units, and that's actually where ComScore, for example, is measuring the viewability of that display unit as well. And that's actually another piece that I feel like we need to be a little bit careful about, because I heard that actually ComScore was saying that puts it apples to apples with TV. I personally disagree, because you can't minimize a TV set, right? But you can pay absolutely no attention to a TV set. You can sit there and you can read a magazine, you can be on your tablet or your phone or be doing a multitude of other things. But that's still viewable, that's still counted. Online, if you're doing other things, they're saying that shouldn't be measured. And I do think there's value to understanding viewability and understanding when your ads are actually in focus, but especially with video, it's the same value as you have on a TV screen when you're not paying attention to what you have online if you're not paying attention. And I think, as it stands, even without the viewability, we have, kind of an apples to apples as it stands. So I think that's also something we need to be kind of careful about, is trying to guarantee on viewability, which is another place where online and TV then become not equal.
And it's also important to understand where that came from, right? So this is getting back to the idea of convergence and the roots of Nielsen and ComScore, back to the very first question. Is ComScore serves all things digital. I mean, they put out studies about cell phone penetration in Brazil, not ads, just cell phone penetration, carrier penetration. So search engine penetration and share and who the top 50 websites are in every country around the world. So from the perspective of a company whose success is tied to the success of its medium, they're coming from a point where there are hundreds and hundreds of billions of ad impressions available every month to advertisers, and the prime goal of those involved with web media, where there is endless supply and therefore pricing is difficult to keep up, is to create a notion of quality. And so the idea of viewability comes from, hey, this is actually not some ad or video ad that ran in a banner slot below the fold and wasn't even seen. We're going to guarantee that this was actually above the fold and that a user actually saw it, and therefore it is worth being called something close to premium. When you're talking about premium content, none of that's a consideration. And so it's important to think about where that's coming from. That idea of viewability is great, but the main reason it's there is not to make the web better than TV. It's to make a lot of the inventory that's not so good look better.
Right.
All right, how about from you guys? Any questions? Just raise your hand and we will get a mic to you.
Can you hear me from there? All right. I was just wondering, in a TV everywhere construct between program supplier and the distributor, who there has the advantage in measurement? The owner of the content and maybe perhaps the owner of the site of the app, or the distributor who owns the subscriber?
It's a great question, and it's a very real question that we've actually been saying is going to become not just a question, but a negotiation and potentially a battle for some time to come. The answer, broadly speaking, is it depends. And the way to frame it is there's who's measuring it, and then there's who has rights to the data after it's been measured or tracked, if you will, right? So, and this actually gets back to ComScore. So the way that ComScore, until 10 months ago with YouTube double attribution, for example, the way that they measured who got credit for having generated video, for example, was whoever's player it was, which is fine, except for the case of embedded players. And even then, really, was it YouTube that generated the view of a clip of The Closer who's owned by Turner, or does Turner get credit for that? And what they came to was, I think the correct answer was, it's a double attribution model. Turner gets credit and YouTube gets credit, right? So in a TV everywhere scenario where this is an authenticated subscriber to a paid TV system like Comcast or DirecTV, does DirecTV get credit for that subscriber, or does Turner get credit? The answer, again, is both. But then that really gets to the meat of it, which is for what purpose, right? So Comcast should be able to claim credit for having generated that view, and there's value there. just for the sake of saying I have this many subscribers and I have this many people watching my shows, and when I go to a negotiation to license content, I can talk about sort of how powerful I am because of all the people that I have viewing content in these areas. But Turner's going to need credit for that for whatever ads ran there. So if it's a C3 environment, meaning they want Nielsen credit, then without question, Turner has to get that credit because it's their commercials being sold by their salespeople in their show. And so really, to get to the root of your question, who's in a better position to measure that? Probably the distributor. It's their technology stack. But who actually has rights to that data, it really depends on sort of what the data is. If it's data about the ads and the ads are sold by the content owner, then that content owner has to have rights to that data. If it's about their video and how many videos were consumed, and they have to pay the studio from which they licensed that content, and that studio has to pay the guild, then the programmer has to have rights to that data. If it's the user, and it's specifically subscriber information, and Comcast knows that this is someone who lives in this particular block and this is their credit card number, clearly that's Comcast. So the answer to the question really depends on what that data is being used for.
More questions?
I'm sort of a neophyte in this thing. So in reality, the science of knowing who is watching for everybody is quite imprecise. I mean, if we know from theaters, from people who buy tickets, we know who walked in and bought that ticket and sat there, and from television, if we go to the midsection, Nielsen has, in the midpoint, we have some idea. We really don't know. I mean, nobody really knows here as a measuring. So if I, as a producer, could make an argument that, I think I know who's watching, I might as well make a pitch of who I think is watching based on certain stats. I might as well make a pitch for it because the science really, my argument could be as good as anybody else's at the moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've done, side-by-side tests to look at, for example, YouTube registered users, right? So they're registered users, they've given this information about themselves. We're targeting those people. Nielsen tells us that they are, some composition, not close to 100%. ComScore tells us a totally different story. So we've got 3 different measurement systems telling us 3 different things about that audience. And that's kind of why I said it's in a way good to have that, because we kind of know that they're all a little bit imperfect. And I think another layer to that is, and this is another area where online and TV are a little bit different, is co-viewing. So, online for music videos, for example, we get a lot of co-viewing, right? We have somewhat of a younger audience. They are watching with their friends. People are watching with their spouses. And online, we don't get credit for any of that. So ComScore and Nielsen, they're measuring only the person who's a member of their panel, right? So they're making the assumption it's one person, and these are their demographics. On TV, in a Nielsen household, when your friends come over, they put their information into your meter, and the network is able to monetize every single person who's watching that show. So online right now, and ComScore is doing a co-viewing study on that specifically, but we don't really know. Not only we're not sure who that person is. We think and everyone has kind of a different guess at it, but we also don't know how many other people are in that room, and that's important too. And I think things need to evolve to that point as well to give online credit for all of those additional viewers that we've been giving away for free. So that's another kind of example of not really knowing who's there.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, there's a question of accuracy and there's a question of consistency. I mean, it's like if you know your clock is 17 minutes fast, then you're still going to show up on time because you know it's 17 minutes fast. I mean, the problem is all of the clocks are different and they're changing because different people are adopting different methodologies over time. And so what's at least is required as accuracy is some measure of consistency, and I think that's probably more than anything what we're all asking for here in the next, say, 2 years, and then we'll start to zero in on something that's actually more accurate.
Hi, how would you see cross-channel technologies such as AirPlay kind of affecting this mix? So the ability to take the video from the tablet or the phone and show it on a big screen?
It's going to. I mean, you also mentioned like Xbox and all. It's kind of like every time we get to measurement of a new screen, there's like a new screen that pops up that needs to be measured, and obviously, that's a really important piece, and it's kind of one of those like shiny objects for advertisers right now to be on connected devices and in AirPlay and to be kind of back on the big screen but through online. And we do need to. I think we're finally at a point where that's going to grow. We've been talking about it for a really long time, connected TVs, but I think we're kind of at a tipping point of that happening, and we obviously need to be able to measure that, and it gets pretty tricky across those platforms, and a lot of those players don't want to have tags, in all of those TV apps and things like that for us to really measure properly. And I think that's going to be something that, and we use Freewheel, and we use Freewheel to measure, a lot of that right now. So, through the ad server is really the only place where you're guaranteed to be able to measure something. The content is kind of a different story because it needs to be embedded in a player someplace. And so I definitely think it's important. I definitely think that's the next step of where we're going. But we're trying to still figure out, even internally, how to get census measurement, on the publisher side of those platforms.
And that's actually, it's a really important point because we've been sort of here talking about all the challenges for the last 50 minutes and not necessarily what we can do about it in the meantime. It is important to reiterate that the currency for digital ads, for the most part, is the currency is the impression. And so if a system, an ad management platform of some kind, really any credible ad management platform that conforms to IEB standards, the Interactive Ad Bureau, which most do, then you can take these new environments that are being created and you point digital demand at it. There are plenty of very high quality ad networks and ad sales forces online that are selling to those buyers which are buying internet typically and not television, and they're perfectly comfortable with just having an impression reported by an ad server, and that's the currency, and you don't need to worry about ComScore or Nielsen. So that's a good place to start when you start talking about two-screen experiences, and generally data sets that a lot of these new environments that are being built have. Particularly when you talk about search and discovery, these second screen experiences, which are not just seeing what a set-top box would see, which is linear television consumption and VOD, or not just seeing what a tablet would see, which is maybe just Netflix or Amazon, but everything that's being watched. That's an amazing data set, and usually with data, a good way to think about it is start with, you start at the end and then sort of move back through the process. So the simple fact that a second screen experience or AirPlay in general is tracking all of this rich data, you can sort of use that, and advertisers and researchers can start to use that to start to think about how to ask for things that they're buying down the road. And so maybe it isn't a currency directly anytime soon, but it feeds into the way that advertisers are asking for things and can kind of inform the currency, if that makes sense.
Anything else? Can you stand up? Can't hear you.
Technology. So if we need help from you all, can you be a part of it? We are launching on next month and we need some help to improve the system.
I'm getting commission on this, by the way.
Sure, let's talk, absolutely.
Thank you.
And what better note than to close with some actual business getting done? How about a hand for our panelists?